Ladies and gentlemen, Chad Calease.
Hi. Thanks. So, I've got to transmit some gratitude to Neil and Ed and the team and Jan and everybody for pulling this all in. It's kind of a big deal. LA, I spent a lot of time here, and as a kid, my dad had an office in Anaheim for years, and he had this ritual. He used to get wherever we were going, and he'd go outside and say, LA, nobody gets old here and nothing rusts, ever. It's the opposite of history. And it really is now, with all the stuff that's kind of going on. The Weinstein story and all that jazz, it really is becoming, I mean, my dad's not with us anymore, but I think he'd really get a kick out of saying it's the opposite of history. I'm going to talk about some history right now. Particularly, it's helpful to learn from history. We're going to connect some dots, and the man himself, Steve Jobs, said this, you guys know this, about connecting the dots backwards. A lot of times gives us some insight into some of the decisions that we've made, and today we're talking about things like technology, networks, security, cybersecurity, resiliency. So we're going to connect the dots way back to 1860. This is really, in a lot of ways, kind of where the story of technology began in the context of the history of networks in this country. If we lived along this route between St. Joseph and Sacramento between 1860 and 1861, there were three guys, Russell, Majors, and Linnell, who founded the Pony Express. And this was IT infrastructure at this point. This was Amazon. If you lived anywhere along this route, you were styled out. You had access to goods and services and stuff that was brand new to the culture. Keep in mind, this was, the Civil War was heating up at this point in time too, so the need for communications had never been greater. There was a lot of mail delivered between this route and an 18-month lifespan of this particular endeavor. 35,000 pieces of mail back and forth, 6,000 riders, 400 horses, and across 150 different mail stations, right? So they were learning about resilience for the first time. They were making lots of mistakes. They were riding their horses too hard, riding the riders too hard. They were learning about single points of failure and all kinds of stuff. They had their own version of InfoSec policies, right? They had this oath that everybody signed. Now, I don't know if it worked or not, but they made an attempt to try to create a framework around which everybody could agree on a set of values and beliefs and goals. No, this was a pioneering effort. I mean, before this, it took them a month. They used ships and wagons and things. It took them a month to get something from St. Joseph to Sacramento. The Pony Express reduced that to 10 days. That was just unheard of. But they never just used horses before, right? So they could cover much more ground on a daily basis, but they were running into problems that they had never solved before. Single points of failure was the big one, right? Rider gets injured or killed, or the horse gets exhausted. That impacts their productivity. So this was a big lesson for them, and they were learning to change horses every 10 to 15 miles. They were learning how to keep strict inventories of riders they could trust, horses that were reliable, this kinds of things to prevent unplanned events of all kinds. But it was all new. And they were also trying to translate this to a culture that was much larger than themselves. Sound familiar? That was replaced very quickly, right? Even as it was replaced with the new technology, the single points of failure continued to exist, right? More lessons, different arena, same lessons. By 1930s, the automobile showed up, right? This was brand new to a lot of people as well. People learned to drive from the salesman they bought the cars from. By 1935, there was only a handful of states that even issued driver's licenses. And of those, only a couple of them issued a test. Even though there was tons of complaints by this point, by mid-30s, about incompetence and people who were buying cars and probably shouldn't be able to use them. Sounds familiar too, right? By the way, car insurance wouldn't become a part of the conversation for another 20 years. 1927, well, to the point of gadgets and new business shaping our ideas and things, these were all kind of interrelated years, right? A lot of new technologies were being introduced. Fast forward to 1953, this guy introduced the idea of atomic energy and atomic testing on things. We had no idea. Anybody know who this is? Anybody want to date themselves? No way we could have known the impact that was going to have. Something about 1953. I don't know what it was, but 1953, yeah, good question. Huh? Nope. Truman.
Harry Truman.
Yeah. There he is.
I thought you were kidding.
But 53 was weird, man. I mean, this was just the tip of the iceberg. C.A. Swanson and Sons introduced this.
TV dinner.
That same, about April 1953. For the very first time, we gave up us as the host of dinner. The women in our lives no longer had to make choices about what to cook, how to cook it. We ate in front of the TV. And you could say that this was really the beginning of letting technology take the wheel, right? The clock that technology sets, we've always just accepted that. And the technology that was being introduced removed us from that work and the choices related to the work. And that would have some implications later on that there's no way we could be aware of. During 1953 in October, there was this show on TV called the Mickey Mouse Club. And in October of that year, the very first TV commercial targeted at children was aired. And it was for this, the Thunderbot. So for the very first time, the word play became defined as something that you bought at a store. Not something that you just invented. These small changes have big ripple effects. Architecture is always an interesting litmus for me. During this time, the attached garage, right? This whole concept hadn't really existed before. Post-World War II. So for the very first time, you could go from your living room to the car to the store without dealing with anybody. So people stopped going next to the neighbor's house to ask for a cup of sugar. Right? So that has some subtle implications. That pebble, when it's dropped into that lake, has some ripples that go out that we wouldn't really realize until much later. And, you know, we followed this pace of business and technology this time. We were just hog wild about this. We followed it, and we followed it away from each other. We were really moving away from each other. That's what we were doing. There was no way we could know it, and it wasn't intentional. But in that movement, we really kind of ever so subtly accepted some ideas about security. You know, whether or not they were intentional. What were these messages about security, these events, these ripples that were being sent to us, to a culture that was new to technology? Security is isolation. You know, even politically, the Cold War, right? Where'd that go? That was all about isolation, right? That was in subtle ways. That didn't just really happen overnight. That was this kind of transition that we went through. And isolation is a strange word. I mean, when I think of the word isolation, I imagine this frozen lake, and it's kind of sad, and there's not a lot of hope. And in isolation, machines, like humans, they don't offer much value. They can't serve services. They might be safe from malware and schwack that we're all very concerned about, but they don't provide any value. Right? Doing business requires taking risks. It requires connecting with something larger than ourselves in acceptable ways. Security is convenient. This was another message we were getting. There's nothing convenient about security. In fact, if it's convenient, it's probably not all that awesome from a security perspective. Right? Our kids, maybe, will never know what it's like to open a car with a key. That's kind of convenient. But everything else requires some intentional effort and some inconvenience. So today, things are considerably more complex. Right? We have a lot more complexity. We adopt tech for the immediate benefits, but we seldom anticipate the less obvious and delayed costs. And the costs of those adoptions are starting to pile up. Right? We're disconnected from each other, big time. Right? We don't have, generally speaking, we don't go to the neighbor's house to ask to borrow a cup of sugar. Right? Making friends in business is key. We have to be able to make ourselves vulnerable in order to make those connections and make things happen. Discovering any kind of beauty, in fact, requires risk. So I think that's been left out of the conversation in a pretty meaningful way. This complexity and this pace that technology sets, has caused us to waste a lot of time. And we're all responsible for that as technical people, because for the last 20 years we would tell people, oh, don't worry about security, we'll take care of it. Don't worry about it. We'll take your admin privileges away, we'll lock things down, ingress filtering, we'll turn all that off. We don't worry about egress filtering, we don't worry about all this other stuff. We don't worry about awareness. We've displaced the responsibility from our audience onto us, and we weren't prepared for it either. So, in a sense, we lost a lot of time, and we have a lot of work to do to make up for it, because this complexity is growing exponentially, and so is the risk and the dependence that we have on it. Right? We're not just coast to coast anymore. We have all of these pieces that are much more complex, and there's much more at stake than there's ever been. The stakes are way higher. And single points of failure remain. Right? These things, we're still learning these same lessons about single points of failure. And how to build, how do we learn by connecting those dots backwards? And we have to design resilience into the systems and processes that we build. And somehow into the hearts and minds of the people that are going to use them. This is, in essence, what we've created. We've created a lot of complexity. Culture is still catching up to this level of complexity, much as it was in the Wild West with the Pony Express, much as it was with automobiles. We've unintentionally created this complexity, and in essence, cybersecurity in particular has delivered a really bad user experience. That's not to say we haven't had some successes, right? Automobiles have been around for a lot longer. We've had a lot more practice, so we have some strategies, right? But we need to take some of these choices back, which is to say, I like this image because what it transmits to me is, yeah, there's this really great solution, but keep in mind, there's still people that refuse to learn how to use them, right? When's the last time you changed a tire? Spare tire. I mean, I just happened to change one recently, and my 5-year-old in the back seat going, what the fuck is he doing? And it was friendly. I mean, everything was color-coded, and there were notches on things. The jack worked like, I can't remember, 10 years ago was the last time I changed a tire. It has gotten exponentially easier. But that doesn't mean that it's made it more accessible to people, because we don't talk about it, right? So awareness is the big piece, and I can't probably transmit that to you enough, that we take all this fluency for granted. We really do. We deal with our clients all the time, and they're all different. They're really snowflakey, and we presume that they have a certain level of fluency, or that they presume that we have a certain level of fluency and security, resilience, but it's really not true. It has to be an intentional conversation. And it makes us, just like the spare tire myth, that we sit, a lot of people, I'm not saying you, but a lot of people would get a flat tire on the freeway. We pull over the side of the road, and we call AAA or Subaru, whoever, and wait for somebody to do something. And because we think that changing a tire is hard, and that's a myth. And there's a lot of other myths. Our clients are vulnerable to a lot of myths. This is the biggest one, right? They are a target. The attackers aren't after them. They're after their bigger clients. Right? Why? Because it's easy. It's a path to bigger fish. These guys, gals, they're not particularly motivated. They're generally pretty lazy. They're not going to do a lot of work. They're going to find the easiest way to get the largest return. Right? So this is pretty important to keep in mind. They also think there's nothing valuable about what they do. Right? I go into lots of different kinds of businesses, big, huge Deloitte-sized companies and small boutique-sized companies, and the same outcome happens every time I go through these resilience exercises. They feel that what they do is way more valuable than they did when we started. They feel that the work they did was more meaningful. And that's how we should all feel, because it absolutely is valuable. It doesn't matter what kind of data or piece of data, if it's an HR piece of data, if it's a financial piece of data, if it's an intellectual property piece of data, if it's just an internal cultural piece of data, something political. We take it for granted. We don't think it's worth anything. It's worth something to the right people. A lot of people think, if I get hacked, no one will find out. Well, that's changing. That may have been true. That may have been true yesterday. But the laws, the insurance requirements and things are changing so fast. Cases are going to the bench every single day that are setting new precedents and changing this. The level of transparency has grown exponentially in the last 18 months alone. So feeling like, oh, I'll just pay the fine, I'll just, nobody will find out, I don't have to, no, man, there's lots of things happening. Most states, like when you discover you're in the midst of a breach, you've got 10 days to report that. HIPAA, FERPA, I mean, you name the PA, you've got a reason to report that to somebody. And this doesn't fly anymore. I don't know that it ever really did, right? This is not a great idea because we're giving more value to the companies that are providing these free services, and they're giving to us, especially in the midst of a breach. In the midst of a breach, you're using a free service, you pick up the phone and you try to call and get somebody on the phone. You can imagine what that experience is like, right? When you're a pro account holder or professional account holder, whatever the deluxe, super mega deluxe, awesome version of their service is, you're going to get somebody to pick up the phone on the other end. But if you're not, if you're just using free services, when you need them, they're not going to be there for you, man. They're not going to be there when the show comes down. And I have had way too many experiences like that. So this is another myth that needs to be broken down. Cybersecurity 100% of the time, I think we can all agree by this point that we can accept this. That no, there's no such thing as cybersecurity 100% of the time. There's only being prepared when something happens. Right? We go off into the woods, camping. We're not just going to throw a bag of rice over our shoulder and go, well, I guess if you're Christopher McCandless, you can do that. But if you want to survive and you want to thrive, you get some rain gear, you get a spare roll of TP, you get some fluency, and then you go off into the woods. And that's business. And my clients in the US are horrible about that. My clients in the EU, light years ahead. And it's probably because of GDPR and some of these things that are coming, some regulation and some incentive for them to do it. But it's not just incentive from a regulation perspective. It's really good. It's the camping thing, right? I mean, you want to have a good time. And you want to have a good time. Like it or not, you have to think about all of these things. So that's why I say cybersecurity is dead. Right? Because cumulatively, these events have led to the death of cybersecurity. Part of me is grateful for that. For 17 years, I've been practicing these things, and sometimes in less intentional ways. But it's really important for us to understand how to protect our businesses and have visibility into how they work. And that's really where we failed, is empowering other people to have visibility into how their businesses work and all those pieces, all that hidden machinery fits together. Now we know that we have a lot of great words, a lot of jargon in cyber, but prevention, defense, compliance, governance, these kinds of things have proven to us that they're just not enough. So cybersecurity isolated all of us, right? We really did a great job. We used all this jargon to distinguish cyber from all these other practices. We used fear, uncertainty, and FUD to sell products and the short term, make some money and all this stuff. But we've displaced our responsibility. And software, hardware and software that we've sold can only do part of the job anyway. And that's always been true. So by displacing the rest of that responsibility onto something that's based in fear, uncertainty, and doubt to sell products, it's probably doomed to fail. And we can talk about Deloitte, Equifax, and Target Corp. We don't have to beat those with a stick. So embrace the attacker mindset has been largely the message that's been transmitted by this culture. Right? And I don't know that our clients ever wanted to think like the bad guys. They want to think about their business. They want to focus on what they do best. They want to think about the value that we bring as practitioners that empowers them to focus on their area of expertise, not focusing on how to think like a bad guy. And the camping thing is, that analogy is pretty true here too. So we delivered in cyber a lousy UX experience, right? And in my opinion, cyber is a UX problem. It's this. It's my parents' living room. It's, cinema sound system scenario, and they're waiting for someone to lead them out of this. We do some stuff behind the scenes, right? Maybe a lot of us can relate to this. We do some things behind the scenes, whether it's at our parents' or our uncles' or our grandparents' house, to make this friendlier, right? But we don't talk to them about it. We don't try to explain to them what we're doing to solve for this behind the scenes. We just do it. And that's what really hasn't taken place yet, until now. But my definition, how I see cyber resilience, is it's much more than just helping less fluent business and technology leaders understand how to protect their businesses in the context of resilience. It's also delivering a better experience, a better user experience to them, something that's friendlier, more accessible, uses friendlier language, uses this analogy of the remote nightmare and making that friendlier. How do we design resilience into those processes? How do we do some things that can have value right away, that aren't going to require people to show up and learn how to change a tire? Because that's not very realistic, is it? People aren't just, because we say, hey, there's this great jack, there's this great new way to change a tire, that doesn't mean that they're going to show up. So we have to do some things behind the scenes that is going to enable this shift. And the first thing is really more empathy, really understanding and listening to our audience more closely. And this template approach that we've had for many years has helped us break a lot of stuff, right? We have to be more intentional. We have to make time to build the right solution for the right environment. And maybe instead of embrace the attacker mindset, the message we should be receiving is embrace the attacked mindset. What does it feel like to be on the other receiving end of this? Instead of prescribing, it's easy for us to be elitist, right? About music, but the kids say, hey, Dad, have you ever heard of the Beatles? Oh yeah, I think I heard they were pretty good. We have to take that a step further and really give them an opportunity to experience us being empathetic to what they've gone through. Unfortunately, I'm often in that position. My phone rings sometimes when things go really bad, and people need, DFIR. They need digital forensics, incident response, and you walk them through that. But let me tell you, man, going through those processes in the midst of an incident, in the midst of a crisis, is exponentially more painful. It's exponentially more expensive, and it just sucks. It doesn't foster teams. Doing this in a proactive way fosters teams. It makes them feel like the work they do is really valuable. Whether they're on the ops side, the dev side, the finance side, even clients. Clients participate in tabletop exercises, even live exercises, and they come out of it. And the beauty of it is, when something happens, they're like, oh yeah, we went through this. You guys were really thoughtful about doing that ahead of this. So it's not something that we have to hide from them anymore. And we need to minimize our risks, and one way to do this is by minimizing complexity. We're really good at adding complexity, saying, oh, well, you need this blinky light box, and this blinky light box, and these kinds of things. And that's really easy, because maybe we want to learn a new technology. We want to make sure that we stay marketable, or that we're, bringing the new next bright, shiny object, because we haven't done anything for them lately. This is something that we can do for them this year and next year, because minimizing complexity, it's not a project, it's a process, it's something we can deliver on year after year after year. And that goes the same for using friendlier frameworks, language, and tools, right? This is the Calease framework that has really formed the basis of my entire business. This was created in 2000 by IBM, this framework, and it really simplifies a lot of disorder. In a sense, we go from the chaotic here, right, where we don't have a choice. We have to act and then observe, look at what happened when we acted and sense that whole thing, and then respond to that. That's where I spend most of my time. Most of us that are in security and resilience, we spend a lot of time in this quadrant, right? We want to be here. This is where we want to get to, right? But there's all this disorder going on. IT is a lot of complex and complicated stuff. The users really need this, and this is where we have to filter a lot of our conversations with them, the messages and the tools and the strategies and the education that we transmit to them. We have to make sure that we can explain it to a 5-year-old, in a friendly way. And if we can't, then maybe we need to go back to learning ourselves and be able to, so that we can transmit that in a friendly way. This always comes back to this, right? Imagine your parents or your friends' living room the last time you dealt with something like this, right? What are some of the things that we did behind the scenes that we didn't explain to them, right? There's one thing that makes me think of mechanics, auto mechanics, right? Now, I said earlier, they've had a lot more practice at this than we have. The car's been around a lot longer than TCP/IP. But when we go to the garage, most of them are pretty good at giving us just enough information to make us feel empowered, but not overwhelmed to us. That's I think, where we really want to get. We want to get to that point. So what are some things that we can do behind the scenes? Routers. There's some things that, some practical things we can do behind the scenes. Eliminate unneeded services. That's great. By default, we should just do that. Instead of just leaving them running, we should just get rid of that stuff, right? Use current algorithms and keys and things. And all these hardware devices are sitting out there using, really old stuff that makes them sitting ducks for attacks. And these are preventable, these kinds of things. We won't go, spend a lot of time on each of these. This deck will be available for you guys to pour through. But, NIST, CIS, the CSC framework is really valuable. Right? There's a 5-point framework that's really awesome for any size business, really, but especially the small mid-market business. They can realize a really quick return on the time that we invest in taking a look at those frameworks to make their environments more secure. That's not adding complexity, it's using what they already have, right? And just making sure that we're configuring it in a way that's much more intentional. Firewall, same sort of thing. We verify that our ops and admin and maintenance and provisioning stuff is using good paths, right? It's really easy to let that get pretty wonky without a little bit of intention. Egress filtering. My peers and colleagues are sick and tired of hearing me talk about egress filtering, right? We used to worry about things and think about things in the context of a castle with a moat around it, a perimeter security model. We don't think about it that way anymore. We can't think about it that way anymore because why? Because of this. This comes into the castle and exfiltrates information out of it. So we have to put rules in and outbound on our firewalls to make sure that those things are intentional and known to us, because when things happen, we have to be able to isolate those things and triage those things very quickly. And if everybody in their Aunt Jane can come and go however they want to, that's going to make our job really, really hard. And it's also probably, if we fast forward a move or two down this chessboard, it's probably going to put our insurance requirements at risk. Right? Staying within those requirements for a team that hasn't gone through these exercises is becoming the norm. And insurance companies are starting to get hip to this. They're like, oh, if we make these requirements tougher, we can prove negligence much more easily, and we don't have to pay on those policies. Wi-Fi. Use a VPN. Doesn't really matter. I don't tell people to use VPN on public Wi-Fi or coffee shops. I tell them just to use VPNs. Just to use encryption tools whenever possible. Whenever possible. When you're at home, my kids' iPads are all on VPNs now. They're all running through Switzerland. I think it's a good idea. I mean, it makes you not have to worry about a lot of stuff, right? Like crack. I don't have to worry about WPA issues. Not even an issue. You're using encrypted traffic, so why should you care? It's just a good practice. Domain name service leakage. I could give you an entire presentation on that alone, because that is really, that makes me angry that there are VPN service providers to the average bear out there that are cheap and awesome and make it look really tasty from a marketing perspective, and it's pointless because when you use them, they're leaking your DNS requests all over the place. I'd rather have, honestly, your DNS info than your actual traffic. It's lighter. It's faster. Right? So these are the kinds of things that we really need to educate others about. And if we're not educated, there's really great ways to educate ourselves really quickly. Switches. A lot of this overlaps. There's a lot of overlap in this, right? We talk about radius servers and things like that, encrypted communications, authentication services. If somebody whacks your level 1, OAuth authentication, the rest is pretty easy after that. I mean, if we can abstract the jewels as deeply as possible, that's a good thing, right? So that's how I kind of keep this in my mind, right? You talk about treating domains as VLANs, segregating networks, Wi-Fi, wire too. It doesn't have to be complicated. Really just make sure that your financial reporting server is not on the same VLAN as the office server that people come in with their mobile phone, because if they break something nasty on the mobile phone, then you've got a whole other can of worms to solve for. So segregation's big. Treat each domain as hostile to your management domain, where all the core routers and switches and your kind of king shit is segregation. There's a lot of really great ways to use the security features built into devices. Right? This goes for peripherals too. We could just as easily take out how to probably configure a printer. Right? Printers are capable of doing all kinds of stuff. Ovens, coffee makers. Right? We'll get to IoT in a second. But that's a really good practice. Right? To just, if you're not using it, just turn it off. Right? Or route it somewhere. Equivalent to like dead null. Like send it somewhere that's not going to be an issue and bite us in the ass at some point. So IoT, we have to think about this again very differently, right? How do we transmit the complexity of this to our friends and family? I mean, this is a part of resilience too. Is if we are not delivering strategies, security practices and ways of thinking that aren't the same in friendly ways to our friends, our families, to protect them, then it's probably true that they're not going to do it. They're not going to use it, right? One of the things Whimsical, my consultancy, does is we make sure that the strategies and tools and things that we deliver have a value on an individual level. Because my experience in lots of different cultures, big corporate cultures, smaller cultures, if I learn something or people in general learn something at work, generally speaking, they're not going to take it home. It's something they do at work. But if they learn something at home, where they find a tool or a service or something that's of value to them in their personal lives. Right, remember when Evernote came out? But man, suddenly I started hearing all these people at work. Yeah, I use it to manage my grocery list, I use it to manage my kids' schedule at school. And they brought it to work with them. I think that's a really great indicator that if we learn something that gives us value in our personal lives, let's let it inform the kinds of decisions we make at work. It doesn't really work the other way. So it's important to keep in mind, especially when you're talking about IoT, because my mind tends to default to IoT, because that's really where I have the most experience, in retail, healthcare, and manufacturing. And there's a different set of rules for that, because we have access to resources and infrastructure and things like that. Consumer IoT is totally different. I mean, we're going back to this 1953, 1930, 1960 kind of model where we're letting this technology into our lives, and we're not considering some of the implications. It's really easy. Just because we have a Fitbit on doesn't mean that we're going to get fit, but it does mean that we're accepting more risk, right? And just being aware of that risk and asking some intentional questions about that is a big part of this, right? So segregation and segmentation, we can I can present an entire thing about that, right? But these are the key questions, in my opinion, that are really important to consider in the context of IoT. Email is our most valuable asset these days. I mean, we used to worry about social security numbers, things like that. We don't worry about that so much anymore. Our email address is the key to the gate behind which is our protected health information, our financial information, our personal details. If someone wanted to social engineer me, access to my email would give them the keys to the castle, right? So, yeah, two-factor authentication, multi-factor authentication, all those things are really important. But if your clients aren't using things like, raise your hand if you know what an SPF record is. Raise your hand if you know what DKIM is. Raise your hand if you know what DMARC is. Raise your hand if you're using any of these things, right? That's awesome. I'm glad that there's more than 5 hands going up, because it's not usually the case. But the way this works, I'll spend 2 minutes on this. How are we doing on time anyway?
You are at, I'm sorry, hold on a second.
I'm good?
You're good.
Keep going?
You got about 12 minutes.
Okay, cool. So DMARC and SPF kind of make this partnership, right? And when both are true, both are acceptable, that's DMARC. DMARC says, okay, there's an SPF record. This can be sent from this mail server. That's legit. And it's also the public key and the private key match up. That's DMARC. And it says, okay, this is probably not a spoof email address. You can read this, right? Or open this attachment. It minimizes, it really protects your client's brand in a large way, right? Because you don't want to get on a blacklist. You don't want to, once you get in that sort of situation, it's really muddy to clean it up, right? And awareness training, empower people with awareness. Mac OS and iOS. Man, malware is here and it's nasty. This stuff persists in memory. We don't even look at network forensics anymore. This stuff persists in memory. You reboot, and it's still there. And it leaves no trace. It doesn't touch the file system. So we're using things like volatility, right? to do forensics on these memory dumps. Memory dumps and logs are going to solve 90% of these kinds of issues that we see, right? So get fluent. Start to get fluent. Read about this stuff because it's here. It's not coming, right? Network forensics is, I don't want to say it's a thing of the past, but it's this much of the pie now where it used to be the whole pie. We have to think about this stuff differently. Don't leave your devices unattended. I mean, today, just here, I flew from Chicago to LA. Today, I saw 3 unattended devices just in ORD. People that just left their laptop on the chair and went to go throw something away, or, I don't know, go to the bathroom. Are they coming back? It's remarkable to me. It blows my mind that people would leave their device, their phone on the device where they go up to get a refill of coffee. Just put it, take it with you, right? Putting stuff on these devices, Blueborn, you guys are reading about this if you're on Twitter. Blueborn's a Bluetooth vulnerability. It's trivial. It's trivial to put an agent, a piece of something on your device and exploit that, especially if we're the average guy walking around that doesn't think about this stuff, right? Awareness is the biggest piece. If you're not using the service, turn it off. Turn off your Bluetooth if you're not using it. Put your airplane, I put my phone in airplane mode when I go to the grocery store. That might be paranoid, but it's a good practice. Stay attached, stay attached, stay attached. Use encryption whenever possible, strong passwords and MFA. And don't click on the link. This is the best advice you can give anybody. Do not click on the link, because we will. 85% of people will click on the link, especially if you craft it, man. It used to be grammar. The grammar Nazis, I probably shouldn't use that word anymore. The grammar police are working for the spammers now. Have you seen some of this beautiful phishing that's going on? It's exquisite. There's no misspelled words, there's no grammatical errors. That strategy doesn't exist anymore. It's now a myth. That's why I say long live cyber resilience. We have neglected to think like our audience for way too long. This is, I'm coming from Omnicom. I spent some time when I came back from Alaska. Most of my experience was in engineering in Alaska for federal, military, university, education, government, native corporations. The native corporations that control tourism in Alaska all have federally subsidized infrastructure. And when I came back to 48, I worked at Omnicom, and this resonated with me when I got there, because we want to do things like this. We want to do things that are brand-centric, that are like, oh, but they always look like this, and they always have purple blinky lights. Their blinky lights are not red. Their blinky lights are purple. Well, when we start thinking like this, and start doing things in a customer-centric way, the best part is, we get some amazing ideas that resonate with an audience that's even larger than ourselves. But that takes intention. And that's not always easy. I know what I'm asking. Believe me. This is not the experience that we wanted. I don't believe that this was someone's intention to create this experience. Right? This is not the experience we get when we take our car to the garage. We trust our mechanics to fix it. We trust our mechanics with our safety and that of our families to fix it. And to do it in a way that it's not going to overwhelm us. It might overwhelm our wallet, but it's not going to overwhelm our brains and our hearts. They've been at it longer than we have. But as I said, but we can get there. I really believe we can. And we can learn from that example. And this has been the cyber security experience. This is not the cyber resilience experience. This is the cyber resilience experience. Cybersecurity is dead. Long live cyber resilience. Thank you for listening. How much time we got for Q&A?
We've got about 5 minutes for Q&A, and then I've got a bunch of announcements. So if people have questions for Chad, please work on.
I'm all ears.
There must be some really good questions. It was a great first time.
They're still there, we know it, but our audience doesn't care. Mom and dad, they don't care. They just want to know, how do I change the volume? How do I turn the stuff on? Right? This is how we have to translate and transmit this stuff for the next generation. Because what we've been doing is definitely not working. We have to make this friendlier and more accessible for people.
Anyone else? No one else? All right, I have some announcements. Oh, next.
Question. More of a comment. emphasis of empowering your users and making them aware of these kind of vulnerabilities and such. And one of the things that we do in our organization is use a tool where our CISO is actually doing the phishing and the mock phishing. And so he's decided, we're not going to give you security training. The training is resisting those phishing attacks. And so when I onboard a new hire, I tell them, you're going to be phished. Our CISO is already planning and crafting very legitimate looking emails that are trying to trick you into clicking the link. And if you click the link too many times, then you have to sit down and get some old school training. But really his philosophy is the training in the experience.
Absolutely.
Is a better way to do it.
Absolutely. I've seen, those strategies can backfire. You have to be careful with the phishing scene, intentionally phishing. The strategies I've seen work best are incentive programs that are not punitive, right? If you want to make them punitive, that's cool. But treat it like a bug bounty, where someone turns in a phishing email, you give them a Starbucks gift card or something, right? Because then you're not going to be getting a bazillion requests, because this doesn't happen every day, unfortunately. But it makes people feel empowered, it makes them feel like they have some expertise, and a little bit of confidence. It's just like with kids, man. I mean, you give them one positive experience, right? If I'm introduced to this object when I feel like shit and I'm barfing my guts out all over the floor, every time I see this object, I'm going to have a residual memory of that sensation, right? But if you introduce this to me in the sunshine, you see my point? And that's what we need to do with these users. We need to introduce them to these things in the sunshine. And they will come back, and they will deliver value, and they will help protect our bottom line and our livelihoods. And that's the goal. That's a great point. Thank you. Well, you got some announcements? Thank you guys for listening.
Anyone else? Any other questions, comments? Okay, so thank you, Chad, very much. Let's give it a hand.